A power plant in Harlan County, Kentucky. It was shut down in 1987. Equipment removed. The building is sealed, gate locked. The utility company filed the paperwork, closed the account, and stopped thinking about it. 11 years went by. In 1998, a field technician doing a routine land survey walked the perimeter of the old station and noticed something that stopped him mid-step. The external meters were still moving, not stuck on an old number, not a needle that had given up and drifted. Moving. The slow, steady kind of movement. That means something is still feeding it. He wrote it down, told himself it was probably the meters going bad after 11 years in the weather, and kept walking. 3 weeks later, the senior engineer on his team pulled the survey report, saw the notation, and drove out to Crane Hollow himself. The meters were still moving, same reading as 3 weeks before. Maybe a little higher. Full output, no power source connected, no line running in, nowhere to send whatever it was putting out. He stood there in the parking lot of a plant that had been officially dead for 11 years and watched the needle move and didn't have an explanation. He still doesn't. This is the Crane Hollow Station story. And the answer, when we get there, is stranger than the malfunction. Stay with me the whole way through. Red State Horror. Real places, real roads, real records. In most parts of America, most people drive past without slowing down. Tonight, we're in eastern Kentucky. And by the end of this, you're going to look at the word decommissioned a little differently than you do right now. Here, we divided the story, Kentucky Horror Story Abandoned Power Plant, into 7 meaningful parts. Let's go. Chapter 1. Harlan County and the station nobody remembers. Harlan County sits in the Cumberland Mountains, in the southeastern corner of Kentucky, deep Appalachia, coal country, the kind of place where the hills come in close and the roads follow the creek bottoms, because there's nowhere else flat enough to put them. The county seat is the city of Harlan. Under 2,000 people now. A lot more than that. Back when the coal was still coming out. At its peak, this county had more going on underground than above it. Mines, shafts, processing operations. The whole heavy infrastructure of an economy built on what was in the rock. And to run that economy, you needed electricity. A lot of it, reliable and close. That's why the Crane Hollow generating station existed. It went up in 1951. A flat piece of ground cut into the hillside, about 6 miles north of Harlan City, where Crane Hollow Creek comes down off the ridge. Not a big plant, not a landmark, the kind of facility that exists because something nearby needs power, and you build what the job requires. 4 boilers, 2 turbines, a substation out back, a transmission line running along the hollow to wherever the power is needed to go. It ran for 36 years. Then, the coal operations it mainly served started scaling back. One by one, through the late 70s and early 80s, the mines cut output or closed entirely. By 86, the plant was running at less than 20%. By the spring of 87, the utility company made the call that most of the workers there had already seen it coming from a long way off. They were shutting it down, not tearing it down. Shutting it down. In utility language, that means the following. Pull the equipment worth saving, lock the building, file the paperwork, and leave. So that's what they did. The boilers were drained. The turbines were locked out. The transmission line was physically cut at both ends. The county was notified. The paperwork was filed. The workers cleared out over 3 weeks in June of 87. And then the gate went up and Crane Hollow Station stopped being a place anyone paid attention to. For 11 years. Chapter 2. The Survey and What It Found. In the spring of 98, a utility company was doing a regional infrastructure survey. Standard stuff. Periodic check on old properties, physical condition, whether anything needed environmental cleanup. The field technician assigned to Crane Hollow was a man I'll call Dennis. He asked me not to use his real name. He's retired now, living outside the county, and said he doesn't want the attention. But he talked to me for almost 2 hours. And he told me the same things that the written record also says, where a written record exists. Dennis drove out on a Tuesday morning in April. He told me the site looked exactly like you'd expect, an 11-year-old shutdown plant to look at. Overgrowth at the fences, rust on the outbuilding doors, a couple of broken windows in the office section. Nothing alarming. Just time doing what time does to things nobody's watching. He walked the perimeter with his clipboard, noting condition issues, taking photographs. Then he got to the external meter panel on the south wall of the main building. These were the meters visible from outside without going in. They were supposed to read 0, static, the measurement of a system that isn't doing anything. Dennis told me he almost walked past them. But he was thorough. He wrote down every reading on every piece of equipment. That was the job. He looked at the meters. Then he looked again. Because the needles were moving. Not dramatically. Not swinging like something had gone wrong. Just moving. The slow, steady kind of movement. That means a system is doing something. Dennis told me his first thought was that the meters had gone bad. Old equipment, 11 years in the Kentucky weather. Sometimes a needle wanders without meaning anything. He wrote it down as a possible calibration problem and kept going. He finished the survey and filed his report. 3 weeks later, his supervisor, the senior engineer on the regional team, a man I'll call Vance, was going through the batch of reports and flagged the notation. He told Dennis to go back out. Dennis drove back to Crane Hollow. The meters were still moving, same reading as 3 weeks before. If anything, slightly higher. Dennis called Vance from the parking lot. He said he didn't want to go back to the meters alone. Vance drove out that same afternoon. They stood in front of the panel together. Vance didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "Who's still connected to this line?" Dennis said nothing. The line disconnect was in the file. Both ends had been physically cut at shutdown. Vance said, "Then what is that?" He pointed at the needle. Dennis didn't have an answer. Neither did Vance. And neither of them, in the time since, has found one that fully satisfies them. Chapter 3. What the records showed. And what they didn't. I spent 3 weeks trying to get the full record on Crane Hollow Station. What I got was a partial record. The shutdown paperwork from '87 is all there. Clean. Complete. Everything signed. The kind of file that says this matter is closed, please stop asking. The survey report from '98 is trickier. It exists. But only in partial form. The full field notes, Dennis's original notation, the follow-up visits, all of it, those are listed in the index. But they're not in the file I was given. I asked about that. I was told the complete file was what had been provided. I don't know if that's true. The county property records pick up from there. The site transferred to a holding company in 2001. That company closed down in 2008. The land went back to the county. And somewhere in that chain of transfers and dissolved companies and partial files, the full picture of what happened at Crane Hollow got very hard to find. The utility company, which has changed names twice through mergers, gave me the shutdown date and nothing else after that. What I do have is this. Dennis talked to me. Vance, now in his late 70s, talked to me briefly and confirmed the meter reading visit. He said, and I'm quoting directly, "I have been in utility work for 40 years. I have never seen a shutdown plant show active output on an external meter. I don't have an explanation for it. I never found one. And I have a maintenance log, not from the utility, from a former county employee who processed records at the Harlan County courthouse in the early 2000s. She found the log during a records consolidation project and held onto a copy because she told me, things that don't fit anywhere. They have a habit of disappearing if you don't hold on to them. The log covers 1989 to 1996, 7 years after the shutdown. It's a handwritten record of site visits to Crane Hollow Station, not by the utility company, by persons unknown. The entries are sparse. Dates, times, brief condition notes. No names, no agency or organization listed. Just observations. And 3 things repeat across 7 years of entries. 1. The fence is maintained, not repaired after damage. Actively kept up. New wire in specific sections regularly. 2. The access road is kept clear. Gravel added 2 entries. Drainage cleared in 1. 3. Something in the substation is noted as operational. In entries dated 1991, 1993, and 1995. Operational. In a building that had been officially empty for 4 to 8 years by those dates. With no connected power source. Someone was using that station. Or something in it was running on its own. And whoever was keeping that log knew about it. And kept showing up anyway. Chapter 4. The 3 workers. Vance told me something near the end of our conversation that he said quickly, like he'd been deciding whether to say it the whole time we'd been talking and finally just got it over with. He said 3 of the original shutdown crew refused to sign the final lockout certification in '87. In utility work, the lockout certification is the last thing you sign before you walk away from a site. It means everything in that building is dead. Every power source is isolated. Every system is off. It's not a formality. It's the document that says nothing in that building can hurt anybody anymore. You sign it. You mean it. Everybody on the crew signs it. 3 men refused. Vance said the company didn't make a scene about it. The 3 men got quietly reassigned. Different sites. Different crews. No formal discipline as far as Vance knew. 2 other workers came in and signed where the 3 men hadn't. The certification was filed. The file was closed. And the 3 men who wouldn't sign, we were never asked to explain why. Not officially. Not ever. I asked Vance why they refused. He said, they said the plant wasn't ready to be shut down. I said, what does that mean? He said, that's what I asked. They said the same thing again. They said it wasn't ready. They couldn't explain it better than that. I asked if he knew where those 3 men were now. He gave me one name. The other 2 had passed away. The name he gave me was a man I'll call Earl. Earl is in his mid-80s, lives in a small community about 20 miles from Harlan. He didn't want to be recorded. He didn't want identifying details used. But he talked. I drove to see Earl on a Wednesday afternoon in early autumn. His house sits on a county road that follows a creek. Hills close on both sides. The sky is a strip between the ridgelines. The kind of place that makes you feel like the land has an opinion about you being there. Earl met me on the porch. He's a big man even now. Hands that spent decades on heavy equipment. He didn't offer small talk. He said, you want to know about the plant? I said, yes. He said, I figured someone would come eventually. Took longer than I thought. We sat on that porch for almost 2 hours. Earl worked the shutdown crew in the summer of '87. He'd been at the plant for 9 years before that. He knew that the equipment, the way you know something, you've worked around every single day. He said the shutdown itself was unremarkable up until last week. Everything came out as expected. The boilers went cold. The turbines were locked. The equipment was cataloged and pulled. But in that final week when the crew was doing the last walkthrough before signing the lockout certification, something happened in the substation. The substation was a separate building about 40 yards from the main plant. Brick, roughly 20 by 30 feet. It housed the transformers and switching gear that connected the plant to the transmission line. The substation equipment had been dealt with earlier in the process. Disconnected. Locked. Done. But on the final walkthrough, one of the crew members went into the substation for a last check and came back out almost immediately. Earl said the man's face was wrong. Not scared. Not hurt. Confused in a deep way, like something had shaken his understanding of something basic. The man said, it's warm in there. The substation had no active equipment, no heating system. It was a sealed brick building in June in Kentucky. It should have been whatever temperature the air outside was. They went in together. Earl said it was warm. Not hot, not uncomfortable. Warm in the specific way that electrical equipment is warm when it's been running for a while. He said there was a sound too. Low, below the level where you'd call it a hum. More like pressure in the ears. Like standing close to something very large that is working very quietly and doesn't need you to know about it. He said they looked at each other and nobody spoke for a moment. Then the foreman came in. He felt the warmth, looked around at the disconnected equipment, and said they needed to finish the walkthrough and get out. Earl said, I asked him what was making it warm. He said he didn't know. I said, doesn't that mean we can't sign the certification? He said, sign the certification, Earl. Earl didn't sign. Neither did the 2 other men who had been in that room. The company moved them out. 2 other workers signed. The paperwork was filed. The gate went up, and the plant, as far as the record is concerned, stopped. But it didn't stop, Earl said. He looked out at the creek for a moment. I knew it didn't stop. I didn't know what was running or why, but I knew it hadn't stopped. I asked how he knew. He said, because the last thing I did before I walked out of that substation, I am putting my hand on one of the disconnected transformer housings. He held up his right hand, looked at it like he was checking it. It was vibrating, he said. Not a lot, just a little. The way something vibrates when it's doing something, you can't see. He put his hand down. A transformer that's been fully disconnected for 2 weeks doesn't vibrate. There's nothing to vibrate it. He looked at me. Something in that building was still running, and when the utility pulled out and locked the gate, whatever it was in there by itself. He paused. I thought about that for a long time after. Still do sometimes. Chapter 5. What the engineer found. In 2003, a structural engineer was hired to assess the Crane Hollow site for the holding company that owned it at the time. The job was a cost estimation for potential demolition. Somebody somewhere was thinking about tearing it down. The engineer, a woman I'll call Sandra, told me she got the work through a regional contractor and had no prior knowledge of the site's history. She went in with a standard assessment kit, evaluation forms, a camera, measuring equipment, and a thermal imaging device. She used it for checking the heat in walls and structural elements. She started with the main building. Structurally, it was in decent shape. Better than you'd expect for 16 years of nothing. Rust, corrosion, a section of the roof in the northeast corner that had finally given up. She told me none of it surprised her. She'd seen worse on much younger buildings. She documented it, took her photographs, and moved to the substation. She noticed the access door. It was in better condition than the main building doors. Not new, but less decayed, like it had been opened more recently than the rest of the place suggested. She noted it and went inside. The interior was dim but not dark. Light came through 2 small windows. Her first impression was a standard decommissioned substation. Empty equipment housings, disconnected cable runs, the general absence of anything active. Then she turned on the thermal imager, and something lit up. In the far corner of the substation, behind a set of empty equipment racks, the imager was showing a heat signature. Not the building's ambient temperature, not the kind of warmth a brick room holds on a spring day. A concentrated heat signature, distinct, localized, the kind of reading a piece of running equipment gives you. Sandra told me she stood there trying to figure out what she was looking at. She moved the equipment racks aside. Behind them was a section of the original concrete floor, plain, nothing on it, and below the concrete, the thermal signature was coming from underground. Not from the building, from whatever was beneath it. She scanned the whole substation floor. The signature pulled toward one corner, roughly circular, maybe 8 feet across. The same temperature all the way through, like it wasn't a hot spot but a zone. 12, maybe 15 degrees warmer than the rest of the floor. She said it looked like something below the concrete was putting out heat evenly and deliberately, the way a system behaves when it's been designed to run steadily. In a building that had been officially empty for 16 years. Sandra filed her assessment. She included the thermal imaging data. She included photographs. The holding company said they got it, and never followed up with her. The demolition project never moved forward. The site sat for 5 more years until the holding company closed down in 2008, and the land went back to the county. I asked Sandra if she ever went back to the site. She said no. I asked what she thought was under that floor. She was quiet for a moment. I don't know, she said. I assess buildings. What I can tell you is that what I saw, there was no residual warmth from old equipment. Old equipment doesn't stay warm for 16 years. Something was actively producing that heat. She paused. The shape bothered me too. It wasn't rectangular like a piece of machinery. It was circular, roughly circular, 8 feet across. Another pause. I don't know what's circular under the floor of a substation. I don't know what produces steady heat for 16 years in a building with nothing connected to it. And I've thought about it a lot, and I still don't have an answer. Chapter 6. The full explanation. Here is what I think happened at Crane Hollow Station. Not everything I'm about to say can be proven from a desk, but it's the only version of events that fits every single data point in the file. It starts underground. Not with the plant. Not with the equipment. With what was already there before anyone broke ground in 1951. Harlan County sits on a complicated piece of earth. Coal country on the surface, sure, but underneath the coal layers, there's something older, limestone. And limestone, over a long enough time, does something interesting. Water gets in, and water slowly dissolves limestone over thousands and thousands of years, until what was solid rock becomes a room. A chamber, a void in the earth, that nobody built and nobody asked for. The Cumberland Mountains have these chambers running through them. A lot of them have never been mapped, because nobody ever needed to go that deep. And here is what most people don't know about limestone sitting under a mountain's worth of pressure. It generates an electrical field, not a strong one, not a bolt of anything, a low, quiet field that exists as long as the pressure exists, which, in the case of a mountain sitting in a limestone chamber, is more or less forever. I've talked about this on the channel before. The ground produces electricity the way a crystal does when you squeeze it. In most places, it's nothing. Background noise. Too spread out to measure, but in some places the geometry works out differently. The chamber is the right shape. The pressure hits the right way. And instead of spreading in all directions and disappearing, the field gets organized, pointed, usually upward. Now here's the part that makes this less impossible than it probably sounds right now. You don't need a wire plugged into a wall to move electricity into something. You need a field. Every transformer ever built works on this principle. A changing electrical field moves current into whatever conductor is sitting inside it. That's not a theory. That's the engine behind every electric motor. Every generator, every piece of electrical equipment. Has anyone ever used it? So the question isn't whether a natural field can do this. The question is whether a natural field can be strong enough and organized enough to do it in a way you can actually measure. At Crane Hollow, I think the answer is yes. And here's why. The site was chosen in 1951 for a specific reason. The ground there was unusually stable, unusually solid. The 1951 survey flagged it as ideal foundational geology. What that survey didn't look for, because nobody had a reason to look for it back then, was what was sitting directly underneath all that solid, stable ground. A limestone chamber, older than the hills above it, large enough that its pressure dynamics have been running steadily for thousands of years, with a geometry that focuses its electrical output upward, toward the surface, toward whatever someone decided to build up there. For 36 years, the plant ran on coal-fired power. The field underneath was irrelevant, completely drowned out by the actual output of the plant. When the plant shut down in '87, the coal-fired power plant stopped. But the field underneath didn't stop. It was always there. It had been there for thousands of years before anyone poured a foundation, and with the plant's own power gone, the natural field was no longer drowned out. It was doing what it always did, moving current into the equipment above it, not strongly enough to run anything useful, strong enough to move a meter's needle, strongly enough to keep a transformer housing warm, strongly enough that 3 workers, who had spent 9 years on that site, knew on the last day that something about that building wasn't finished. The plant wasn't ready to be shut down because the plant wasn't the only thing running. The ground underneath had been running the whole time, and when the utility pulled out and locked the gate, the ground just kept going because it didn't notice that the plant had left. Chapter 7. What nobody asked until now. I want to ask one question that I haven't seen anyone in the Crane Hollow file think to ask. If the chamber under that substation was producing an organized electrical field strong enough to move a meter's needle in a building with nothing connected to it, what was it doing to the people who worked in that building for 36 years? Not a dramatic question. Not were they in danger. A specific question. Because there's a body of research, not headline-grabbing stuff, but real documented work, on what happens to people who spend a long time inside a low-frequency electrical field. Mild things in most cases. A low-grade feeling that someone else is nearby. Time feels slightly off. A sense of being more connected to the people around you than the hours you've spent together should really explain. And in some cases, people inside the same field at the same time report thinking the same thing without having talked about it. The same image, the same feeling, the same thought is landing in 2 heads at once. The workers at Crane Hollow spent years inside that substation, working on equipment sitting directly above a field that we now have a real reason to think was organized and pointed upward. I asked Earl about this. I laid out the research without leading him anywhere. I just described what documented exposure can do and asked if any of it matched his experience. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "The substation crew was different." I said, "Different how?" He said, "Close. Unusually close for men who didn't really socialize outside of work. We just knew each other in a way that the years together didn't fully account for. Like we were always thinking about the same things without having talked about them." He stopped for a moment. There were times I'd be doing something, thinking about something private, something at home, and I'd look up and one of the other men would be looking at me like he already knew. Not strange about it. Just present, like we were in the same room in a way that was more than just the same room. He paused again. I always figured that was just what it meant to work alongside people for years. The closeness that builds up. He looked out at the creek, but now you're telling me the ground was running something under us the whole time, and I don't know anymore. If what we had was just years together, or if we were all sitting in the same field and the field was doing something to how we connected. He was quiet for a bit. "We still call each other," he said. "The one's still alive. Just to check in. No real reason most of the time." He looked at me. "Do you think that's from the field?" I told him I didn't know. He nodded slowly. "I'd like to think it's just us," he said. "That we were just that close. But I'm not sure anymore. Neither am I." In the last Crane Hollow Station, Harlan County, Kentucky, a power plant built on the ground that was already running something before the first brick was laid, shut down in '87, still showing output in '98, still warm underneath in 2003, and a crew of men who knew on the last day that something wasn't finished and couldn't find the words for it in a lockout certification form. The building still stands, mostly. The county owns the land. The equipment is long gone. And underneath the substation floor, if I'm right about what's down there, nothing has changed. The chamber is still the same shape. The pressure is the same. The field is the same. It doesn't know the plant is gone. It doesn't know 37 years have passed. It's just doing what it does. Quietly. Steadily. The way it always has. The way it always will. That's Red State Horror. Drop "still running" in the comments. Just those 2 words. I read every single one. And if you've ever worked in a plant, a mine, a substation, anywhere with heavy industrial equipment in Appalachia, and something about your time there felt like more than just the job, I want to hear it. Subscribe if this story found you. New Story Thursday. Drive safe. Get home before dark.